John Talks, Episode 10, Reading the News. So, it sounds like a pretty normal thing, reading the news. And I suppose it is. And most people, they read the news. They have a newspaper or a news site that they go to, and they read some news, and they believe that they've read the news. And, technically they're correct. Now, I have a much different process for reading the news, much more in depth, and I'm going to explain it here. So I've been reading the news ever since I was a child. It was a habit passed down to me from my father, who was a longtime attorney and intellectual and academic. And he stressed the importance of staying informed. And I was growing up in the early 80s in the San Fernando Valley. And so I did. I started reading the paper. As a kid, I scanned the sports section, hated the economy section. We got the LA Times, and then when my mom divorced my dad and took us to a lower class existence, we got the LA Daily News, which was a rag that the ink actually came off onto your hand. But when I was reading the LA Times, look at the front page, not really understand it as a kid. Look at some of the other ones like calendar and finance or whatever, business section, and then which was like death as a kid. And then get to what I really liked, which was the sports section. And at that time, I think it was Jim Murray. He was the big columnist at the time, the classic columnist. And obviously read about the Dodgers or, the Lakers or whoever I was into at the time. And then on Sundays, get the Sunday Funnies, where you get the whole comics section. That was the insert on Sunday with all the ads. And the ads were fun as a kid because this is pre-internet. So it was fun to just look through all the ads, and they would spend money on the coupon inserts. So those were like glossy. So those felt good. And then sometimes they'd put an LA Times magazine in there. So Sunday was a fun edition, but the comics were the star of the Sunday. Love that. Really look forward to it. So I already had a habit of reading the newspaper to the point that, but when I got to high school, I was reading Parents Divorce, and I was going to high school in San Jose. So I was reading the San Jose Mercury News to begin the day. And I remember my senior year, I had AP English at like 6:30 in the morning or 6:15 in the morning. Maybe it was 6 in the morning because I had to get up at 4:30. So I get up at 4:30 and I'd be in the house all alone. It was cold comparatively to LA. I'd be reading the San Jose Mercury News, and they had a sports columnist who I forget his name, but he was humorous. He wasn't the funniest guy, but he was consistently making an attempt to be funny. That was his thing. I forget his name. I'm sure they remember. But he inspired me because my senior year at Pioneer High in San Jose, I got talked into writing for the newspaper. And so I pitched a funny sports column, and I called it Scaliascope. And they accepted it, and I wrote it, and I became pretty famous. That was the first time I got famous, like, for writing in an environment. So I became famous in the school. And then remember, this is before the internet. I graduated high school in 94. So, technically we had the internet, but it wasn't the internet, It was more of a slow research tool and a slow email tool. So I was not competing with social media. And I devised it so that each column I wrote had a very large picture of me, and the picture of me was I cut out I deflated a basketball and wore it as a hat, and I was doing the thinker's pose. And so that was posted every whatever it was, like month that we published a newspaper. So, and that was before social media, so people were all seeing my picture, and worked out pretty well for me. Put me in a little bit of a row with my baseball coach because he didn't like that one of his players was had some juice, I guess. And so that was what my relationship with reading the news was until I went to West Point. And then I got to West Point, and they have a tradition where the plebes have a bunch of chores, and they're like delivering laundry and doing food preparation at the community tables and a couple other things. And then they have to deliver all the newspapers. We got the New York Times when we were in West Point. We got the New York Times delivered at like 4 in the morning. We'd have to go in, get all the newspapers, and you have to put them in front of the cadets' doors. Just so there's a way you do it. And you have to do it by class and rank order, and it's the whole thing. So you got to get the newspapers to them. And then further requirements were mental. You had to memorize all of the meals of the day. You had to memorize all this arcane knowledge that they had, that they're famous for. And then you also had to read and memorize the front page and the sports page of the New York Times every day, which you were accountable for. Upperclassmen come up to you at any point and they could ask you anything about the front or sports page of the New York Times, and you had to be able to tell them, or you were open to demerits or punishment or disciplinary action, wherever they wanted to take it. Now, that was tricky, especially on Mondays during football season, because the New York Times would publish the scores of every single football game on the front page of the sports section, up in the top, like in small print. So you'd literally have to memorize every football score, or at least hope that somebody didn't ask you one. You didn't. And then, some people would play games with you. They'd try to ask you, what the captions were under the pictures, and, what the edition number was, what the volume number was of that paper, like all kinds of stuff, just to keep you on your toes. But most people would ask you straightforward questions about articles, and it would give you a chance to do a little bit of analysis, because they wouldn't just want, once you get past the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, and then the how, they'd want some analysis. And so when you do that for like 9 months straight, that you have to do that of every day of memorizing front page, sports page, New York Times, you do grow a taste for it. You acquire a taste for it, and you need it. And so you continue, even though, and then through my upper class years, even though I wasn't required to read the New York Times per se, obviously I did, because I enjoyed it. And then my senior year, was my senior year? Yeah. I took advanced computer science, and maybe I took it my sophomore year, but when I took advanced computer science because it gave me access to the internet before the rest of the cadets. Yeah, that's what happened. My sophomore year, I took advanced computer science, and that gave me an account that gave me access to the internet when the rest of the post didn't have it. That didn't happen until my senior year in 98, which at the time was actually kind of advanced. So also, while I was at West Point, my freshman year, I failed chemistry by a few points, which was crazy. And so not only did that automatically enroll me in summer school between my freshman and sophomore years, which was actually a blessing in disguise, but I didn't know that at the time. It also automatically enrolled me in this thing called the study skills course. Now, in the study skills course, which I took second semester plebe year, freshman year, I was put through a bunch of different advanced study techniques, which ranged from, they taught me how to do deep meditations to put myself into quick REM sleep in this thing called the egg chair, which was a meditation chair with accompanying video and audio, where they taught me how to control my brain waves and my brain frequencies. And this was back in the 90s. It was clutch. That ended up being great. Quick reaction tests, other things that could only be described as like psychic enhancements or whatever. And then advanced note taking, which was all right. And then the thing that was really applicable here was they taught me how to do speed reading. And speed reading sounds like mumbo jumbo until they teach you how to do it. And then it's a game changer. Now, when they were introducing me to the concept of speed reading, they gave us a lesson about President John F. Kennedy. And they told us that John F. Kennedy, he began his day as president, not only with his intelligence briefings and everything, but when he got to the Oval Office, he had it was like 7 newspapers, the front page from like 7 different newspapers from different countries. And he would speed read all of the front pages, front to back, before he even began his day. And that always stuck with me, because that's a lot of information, especially when you're the president and you're going to have to go deal with like a whole bunch of you basically deal with information all day long. So that stuck with me. Now, I went through, my military career, and I always kept up on the news, but it wasn't as important, especially when I got higher up in the military and I got to levels of security clearances. Like when I was working for General Quinlan planning the Iraq War, I was in a top secret chair, as they say, and we were planning the Iraq War, and then I would go read the news or see the news, and they were completely off, because we were planning the Iraq War, and the news was saying that the Iraq War, the invasion of Iraq, was a conspiracy theory. So that's when I started to see, a schism between reality and what the news was putting out there, which is not unusual. Anyway, fast forward to modern times. And by modern times, I mean around 2019, 2020. Well, we'll say 2020 because it was COVID lockdown. And I was on TikTok, and I was entertaining people on TikTok. I had a bunch of followers, and I was mainly doing satirical. Well, I was mainly just doing comedy sketches. And then things were getting really censored. They started to get real censored under COVID, as everybody knows. And I'm allergic to censorship. So I did a fake news show. I did a one-off where I put a green screen behind me, and I went through and I read some news, and I picked out some articles that I thought were wrong based on my experience from the military, having been on the other side when I knew stuff was correct, when I knew what the truth was and I knew what was going out as was either a lie or propaganda from the news. So I went through and I picked out some of those, and there's some funny ones and like some hypocritical ones, and I put those articles on a green screen behind me, and I did funny videos where I was the satirical news anchor, and it was called News in the News. And the tagline was, the opening every time was, "Today on News of the News, coming at you what? MK Ultra free." And then I would go into, a bonkers newscast, ripping the news apart and in different ways. Well, people loved it. It became quite popular quite quickly. And they no longer liked my comedy videos. They just wanted to see me rip apart the news and have a fun time doing it because everybody was on lockdown. Everybody's getting screwed. So I said, all right. And I knew once I decided that I was going to do the news that it was a suicide mission in terms of like my profile, because they were already canceling people and deleting people for contradicting whatever the official message was of the day, right? Like it could be whatever. Like one day it could be like, yes, you have to get a vaccine because vaccines are obviously going to save the world, and if you get a vaccine, you won't get COVID, and nobody else will get COVID. That's a fact. That's 100% fact. 11 out of 10 scientists say that if you get a COVID shot, that nobody will get COVID. It'll end it, and if you don't, you're a bad person. You're going to go to hell. So that was pretty much the messaging during that period of time. And oh, by the way, we're going to blackmail you out of your job if you don't get one, and we'll take your kids away. So have a good day. We love you. And, that was the whole tone of COVID. And so that's easy to play against when you know for a fact that it's false. Because at the time, from like day one, I knew it was false. And so I started doing these News of the News cast, right? And in the long run, over the course of however long I did it, was like over a year. It was like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I don't know. Before they finally did cancel me, I did like 35 million views just through the newscast. Like people loved it. And so it was good. And going back to the reading of the news, the way I would prepare to do the News in the News was I had a list of websites that I would open up every morning and I would go through. And it would take me a decent amount of time. I'm going to read you all the different news sites that I would go through. Now, when I go through them, I was using my speed reading skills, but I should also make it clear that I was not reading every single article on these sites. I had a process. When I would go to a site, I would do an initial scan of all the headlines, and I would see what the trend was for that particular site, right? Like, so if I went to LA Times, I would read all the heads, read all what was going on, see all the pictures, see how they composed their site that day, because where you put the pictures and where you put the heads, it matters. It lets you know what the editorial choices are. It lets you know what the tone of the organization is. It lets you know how they're propagating their information. It's a huge tell. Like when you know the news side from the inside of like, yes, these are all choices that they're making. So if they put a big fluff headline up front, make it seem important, and then like, on the bottom in the fine print they bury that like local politician embezzles $100 billion, like that tells you stuff. So I would go to each site, scan it, and then I would see what the theme was or what the trend was, and whatever caught my eye, I would go into and read it, and I'd read a lot of the articles on each site, speed read them, go through them, and then when you're speed reading, you also have the ability to slow down and go deeper into it as well. It's not just like, it's not rote. And then when I go from site to site to site to site, not only am I seeing the internal trends, but then I'm starting to see the bigger trends. And then that was when I could start to see like, okay, is this site, are all the left-leaning sites, are they all putting out the same message? Are all the right-leaning sites putting out the same message? Are the independent sites, where are they at? Where are these? And also during this period of time, I had already been alerted to the importance of uncensored news due to my position in the military with security clearances, because I knew that most of the time only the uncensored sites were going to get close to that, like the actual hardcore truth about subjects. Pedestrian subjects don't really matter. Like people, whatever, they'll report traffic accidents or lawsuits or court cases or, things that are in the public forum. They can't really fudge with them too much. They can frame them a certain way. They can give you like their context, but there's not much they can do with it. But when it comes to like different things, things that there's not previously agreed upon context on, that's where you really need the uncensored news, especially when it comes to things that are in dispute in the public consciousness. So I keep an eye out for those items. So I would see what the trends were internally, what they were left and right. By the way, the overall trend in terms of left and right was just that the left-leaning papers, they all seem to be on the same page. They all would pick the same topics and emphasize the same things and kind of have the same messaging, which I didn't get, because I don't think they were coordinated, because they have different editors and they have different, like Washington Post is in Washington, New York Times in New York, and CNN's in Atlanta. So it didn't feel like their newsrooms were communicating, but they're basically putting out the same newspaper every day. Whereas the right-leaning ones were all over the place. Like some were, one day, like, one would be like on alert for the CCP transgressions, and then, Fox would just be like, attacking the DNC, and then, whatever. Like they're all over the place. They were rarely reporting the same news stories unless it was a major world event. So the list of sites that I would go through during News in the News, I have it here. It'd be LA Times, New York Times, USA Today, Al Jazeera, BBC, The Gateway Pundit, Fox News, CNN, HuffPost, Newsmax, Epic Times, InfoWars, Natural News, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, What Does It Mean, Drudge Report, NOAA Report, and ESPN. So there were two entertainment sites, obviously, Hollywood Reporter and Variety, which are the two trades for entertainment, and then ESPN for sports, which is interesting. And then so even if you don't, or even if I don't go into every article on those sites, reading the heads and juxtaposing them to the other sites, you can start to see the big data trends, and you can see, basically the bigger picture. And then and then the biases on either side start to come out. You start to see how either side is starting to see things, and you don't have to do much analysis for it. It's pretty obvious once you lay your eyes on it enough times, like it just stands out. It's clear. And so that was also part of what I was doing for my satirical news reporting, was just picking up on those obvious juxtapositions that were in the consciousness and bringing them to light, which is entertaining. And if you slap a punchline on it or you set it up right, it's just funny. It's just funny to see that same news events are getting different treatment, and then you kind of internally know why. So yeah, so reading the news. So what wisdom can I give you after I've been analyzing the news for decades now, and to different degrees, and then putting out my own version of the news to different degrees for a while. So what I can tell you is that it's important to read more than one news source. It's important to read news sources that you disagree with. Like if you're used to reading Mother Jones, make sure you read Breitbart, and vice versa. You know, it's also incredibly important to read uncensored sites, uncensored news when you come across them, and it'll be difficult for you to find them most of the time because they're usually one man operations that don't have any funding for advertising. But when you come across them, you got to treat them like a pearl, because if somebody's willing to put out unbiased, unpaid for news and they're doing a good job of it, I don't read Uncle Willie's pamphlet or whatever that's like this is what he makes when he's done making moonshine and he hates the government, which I'm not, I'm for him in that situation, but not necessarily going to read his news pamphlet. But somebody who actually knows what they're doing, or if it's from a foreign country and they're doing uncensored news and it is uncensored, treat that like a gem, because those are valuable. Because the corporations have bought up pretty much all the news outlets. So even if they're doing their damnedest to just do straightforward reporting, just within their infrastructure, they're limited from being able to do it, because there'll be so much pertinent news that is more important than what they're reporting on that day that they can't touch because of just the corporate structure. So, if they want to do revelations about advanced technology or UFOs or aliens or Bigfoot or, hidden medical tech or certain types of corruption, they're just not allowed to get into it. And so in terms of them being a broad spectrum news source, they're not as broad as you think, because they're highly limited by what they're allowed to report. None of the mainstream news people. There was that reporter, I forget her name, a few years ago. She was on TV and she was with one of the major news organizations. I forget if it was like CNN or the Times or whoever it was, one of the biggies. And it was when the Epstein stuff was coming up, and she was talking about it. And she said, yeah, we had that guy. Like, she said she personally had the case together and had studied it and done the research, and they had the guy nailed, and it was a bunch of like super rich, powerful people along with him. And she was super frustrated. This is a famous clip, by the way. It's not like some minor thing. She famously did this. You can find it on YouTube, where at the end of an interview, TV interview, she starts talking about it. Like, she was upset that the editor canceled it and that she couldn't go after Epstein and the network that was involved, like the network of people that was involved in these child trafficking and prostitution things. And it was clear that that was the corporate news structure protecting rich people, rich criminals, rich, terrible criminals, ones that, when you think about news and when you think about the power that news has to correct wrongs or shed a light on the dark, you could say that those were the people that the news organization was explicitly set up to report on. The most powerful people, the most powerful country on the earth, committing the worst crimes in the open, using their positions of power and privilege to do it. And here was this woman who said that she had done the work on it. And she was saying that her corporate overlords nixed it, couldn't go out, she couldn't do what the noblest ambition of a reporter is to do, which is to report the truth and keep power in check as a balance of power, and to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, which are children. And she found out that that was not the job. And she found out that her news organization it was certainly an organization, but maybe it wasn't so much about news. So it's important. And it's important to be able to, once you do it long enough, to get calibrated to how the news feels and looks, and which organizations can put it out in a certain way and what their style is. And then you get a feel for it, and then you can really do independent research, and you can come across new stuff and kind of suss it out and do your research for yourself and figure it out. But it's important, and news organizations, they are important. They'll never not be important. Their standing in society will always directly reflect their ability, the percentage of truth and the percentage of the important truth that's needed within their communities being reported. So if they're doing a good job, if they're putting out the truth, and they're keeping the focus on the issues that matter, that keep their communities informed and healthy and safe and prosperous, then they're doing their job. And they will also prosper, and they will do a good job, and they'll be trusted. And when they stop doing that, the opposite will happen. And that's just kind of for the readership to figure out as it goes along, because you build trust on, one article at a time. And if you break the trust, you're kind of fucked. And if you don't, you're good. So anyhow, that's reading the news. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you have a good one.